Eugenie Sage.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Pleased to take a call on the Hurunui Kaikoura Earthquakes Emergency Relief Bill. Mr. Speaker, I've seen obviously the twisted bridge over the Otakaro Avon River, the massive slumping and cracks beside the Avon in Christchurch, the liquefaction, the sand volcanoes, have heard the cliffs tumbling down in Littleton Harbour. But that still didn't prepare me for seeing firsthand the massive damage which the earthquake has wrought in the Kaikoura area. Just the size of the slips, and like everybody, the major uplift that has occurred in the seabed, which is quite unprecedented. And when we hear of our islands sort of moving centimetres north as a consequence of the earthquake, the scale of the response needs to be similarly significant. And that's one of the reasons the Green Party is supporting the bill to our Select Committee, because we know that in emergency situations like this, the government does need to act quickly. And we certainly appreciate the discussions across the Parliament which Minister Brownlee has convened, and his willingness to accept the suggestions of some of the opposition parties, and would suggest that if he could commend that approach to some of his colleagues, particularly where it comes to the Resource Management Act and the changes we are seeing there, that actually results in better legislation. So would like to place on record our thanks to the Minister for the collaborative way in which he's gone about developing this legislation, and are pleased that even as late as last night at the meeting, some of the changes that were suggested there have been developed by officials and included in the bill. So we also acknowledge the huge amount of work that public servants have been doing on this legislation. Mr. Speaker, Kaikoura has grown from a small and pleasant coastal town to a thriving nature tourism destination before the earthquakes, and one which we hope it will be again. And it's because of its natural geography, because of that spectacular, wild and distinctive coastline and its marine environment. The feature of the Kaikoura Canyon going offshore just north of Goose Bay and staying quite close to shore for a couple of kilometres, it's that deep canyon and the very biologically rich waters of the canyon which attract a lot of the marine life, particularly the whales, the dolphins, and that is fundamental to why people have come to Kaikoura. So, of course, with the seabed uplift, preventing boats accessing the pontoons that the Whale Watch, the Dolphin Encounter and other vessels use, meaning that those can only be accessed at a much more limited range of the tide, there is a need to ensure that boats can get back into the harbour by doing some rehabilitation works. And the concerns that the Green Party has around changes to the Resource Management Act are where they override processes which allow the community to contribute the information that they have about places that they value and care about, and places that they often know a lot about. So this bill, in terms of the provisions around South Bay and also the North Harbour at Kaikoura around Ingalls Wharf, do override the Resource Management Act by providing for a truncated process, one where there is no appeals, and as a controlled activity, which of course means that the blasting, the dredging and the work associated with that must be given consent to by the councils, but conditions can be added in terms of how that activity is taken out. And we are pleased that there was a small change made to the bill because at the moment, under the truncated process, there are a range of organisations that are consulted with, Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu and any relevant Papatipu Runanga, the Kaikoura Coast Marine Guardians, who were appointed with the establishment of the Whale Sanctuary and Hikurangi Marine Reserve. But there was originally no provision for notification to the public. Now there is the possibility of councils actually notifying it. So we would encourage the councils, Kaikoura District Council and Environment Canterbury, to do that, because people like fishers and residents can often contribute a lot of valuable information which assists in ensuring that the decision is a good one and that appropriate conditions are attached to avoid, remedy and mitigate any potential effects. Because blasting work, particularly some are talking of significant rocks being blasted as part of this work, will have impacts on the marine environment. They will reduce marine habitat. There will be sediment. And of course there is the critical issue of where the blasted and dredged material is deposited. The bill, as I understand it, provides for that to occur on land rather than at sea. And then where that happens, because of the large volumes of material that will probably come out, is also important, because it is the natural character of the coast and those distinctive landscapes which people enjoy about Kaikoura, and we don't want to see this urgent activity undermining the attractiveness of the coast and the town for the thousands of visitors that we hope will be coming back to Kaikoura in future when the transport links are restored. So the bill, as well as allowing the rehabilitation of the harbour, also, as others have noted, overrides the Resource Management Act in allowing farmers who need to do works in riverbeds, to do earthworks and other associated work in response to the earthquake, to do that as a permitted activity without the need to get a retrospective consent from the relevant district council. And it also extends the timeframes for people who have done emergency works using the existing provisions under the Act to actually notify the councils of those works. So, Mr Speaker, this bill does go some way to reassuring those who have done work urgently that they don't have to go through the resource consent process, but we have more concerns about the legislation that will be brought to this House later this week, where ministers are likely to get quite significant powers to override not only the Resource Management Act but a number of other pieces of legislation. We are pleased that in this bill there have been some safeguards put in, that there is a range of organisations to be consulted with around the Kaikoura Harbour works, but we also will be looking very closely at the bill that is introduced later this week to look at the extent to which there are further safeguards as suggested by members of the cross-party working group. And we are pleased that the bill that is coming later in the week has actually got additional safeguards compared to some of the compared to the legislation that was introduced in the aftermath of the Canterbury earthquakes. But it is a major task for everybody in Kaikoura. The community there is responding in the way one would expect. People recognise, I think, that it is a long, hard road to recovery. This bill, with the changes around the harbour, does make a step to ensuring that the ability to have those nature tourism trips, for the whale watch to work, for the dolphin encounter people to take visitors out, is able to happen in the most expeditious way possible. Thank you.